Principal Matters Podcast, episode 505. Hi, friends. It's Will Parker back with my co-host, Dr. Jen Schwanke, for another Principal Matters episode. Jen, this episode's coming out in the middle of June, and today's guests are two. Can I have favorites? They're two of my favorite people that write about problem solving and conflict resolution and hard conversations. Erika Bare and Tiffany Burns are both Oregon administrators. And man, you guys are going to love this conversation. I'm just going to say right now, anybody who teaches like master's level courses or doctoral level courses where people are asking the question, how do I have that hard conversation? You're going to want to pick up their new book. So Jim, before we let listeners enjoy them though, here's our question of the week. This is a hard one, and you and I are going to relate.
No, this is easy. This is an easy one.
Okay, here it goes. I want to say yes to new opportunities outside my building without neglecting my first commitments to my school. Is it possible to do both?
Yes.
The answer is yes. Now, let's unpack that, because you and I both talk to people. Actually, let's just start with us. You and I both have been leaders who've been asked to do things outside of our buildings and that you can fill in the blank. Maybe that's mentoring someone else, coaching someone else, presenting about the things happening in your work, speaking at conferences, volunteering. The list can go on. Being a coach for your kids' baseball team. There's a lot of things you could fill into that blank. And here's I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to throw the ball to you. I think what I hear, though, in the tension of this question is, am I being selfish if I'm saying yes to things I love to do when I should just be putting my head down and just being here and doing this all the time?
I would argue it makes you a better leader when you take advantage of those opportunities outside of your building. I think if you commit yourself so deeply and fully just to the inside of your building, you miss a lot of learning, a lot of relationships, a lot of networking, a lot of ideas, inspiration, joy. You miss all of those things that can come when you are taking advantage of opportunities outside of the building. I also sense intention, and maybe this is because I'm looking for it because I feel it, which is guilt. Guilt that you are not 100% committed to your people, but you are. You're just choosing to take some of your energy and put it in places where you're going to get better outside of the sight line of the teachers and parents and students in your building. They don't see it, but it's happening. And I'll before I turn it back to you, Will, I will say this important thing. If you want something done, ask a busy person. That is so true. And so to be involved in, the speaking, the writing, the mentoring, whatever it is, to do that makes you better, makes you busier, but it makes you more efficient. And I really think it will make you a better leader.
I agree. I almost want to bring this question back sometime as a Monday Matters, because I want to play the devil's advocate for a minute, because there may be a leader out there that's like, yeah, but I've watched some of my leaders get so involved in things that they're neglecting the thing I want them to be working on. And, I think there's nothing wrong with a honest conversation with someone about, hey, how are you doing on that goal we set together? How are you doing on that thing that we said we'd be working on, but not immediately assuming the worst intentions about the other person's passions or interests or the things that they enjoy doing, just because someone is involved in other things that bring them joy or grow them does not automatically mean that their intention is to avoid the first commitments either. I know we can unpack that in many ways.
Well, I think we should talk about it maybe on a Monday Matters, because I actually have a post coming up in my newsletter about this, about visibility and availability, and good leaders do both. And if you're only doing one, then that's where people start to get resentful. Is it, they might see you every day, but if you're not really available to help them, that's no good. And if you're available when they call, but they never see you, it's out of whack. So I think a lot about that, to the point where I'm going to write about it.
Oh, Jen, I'm so glad you're doing your newsletter. And Principal Matters listeners, if you're not reading it, you're just missing out completely.
Oh.
Everybody that listens to this show should subscribe right now. Jen, how can they find your newsletter as we wrap this Q&A up and introduce our guest?
You are so kind, Will. Thank you. They can find the newsletter subscription link at my website, jenschwanke.com.
And you can find all of today's show notes, including the links to the wonderful new book by Erika Bare and Tiffany Burns at williamdparker.com. So Jen, until next time, and listeners, until next time, thanks for doing what matters, and we'll talk to you soon.
You're listening to Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast.
Over 1 million teachers use iExcel in their classrooms every day for one reason. They love it. Why? iExcel is where the magic happens. With just one platform, teachers can personalize learning for every student. iExcel gives teachers all the tools they need to enhance and differentiate instruction without adding work to their plates. Plus, iExcel has decades of expertise and is proven to be effective. Studies on more than 70,000 schools across nearly 50 states show that those who use iExcel outperform others on state tests. Ready to bring the magic to your school? Visit iexcel.com/PM to learn more. Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, back with you for another episode. This week, we're going to be talking about a school leader's playbook for tough conversations with two special guests, Erika Bare and Tiffany Burns. Tiffany and Erika are veteran educators and co-authors of Connecting Through Conversation, a playbook for talking with students. Tiffany brings more than 2 decades in education, from teaching at the elementary, middle, and high school levels to instructional coaching and serving as an elementary principal before taking time to teach and support educators nationwide as a part of the Connected Communicator movement. And Erika Bare has spent over 20 years in education, including roles as special education teacher, administrator, currently as a district leader committed to helping all students reach their potential. And together, these ladies blend their deep classroom and leadership experience with practical communications tools that help adults build stronger, more connected relationships. They're also the authors of the new book, A School Leader's Playbook for Tough Conversations. They're returning guests. They were on episode 369. Can you guys believe it, from your first book? But welcome back to Principal Matters Podcast. Why don't you guys fill in the gaps on that intro? And before I start diving into my questions, why don't you tell listeners something else they may be surprised to know about you? Tiffany, you go first.
All right. Thanks so much for having us back, Will. It's always so lovely to get the chance to talk with you and your listeners. Well, what folks may not know is that in the fall of 2024, I did a really significant career change. I had been a building principal for 12 years. And then, like you said, Eric and I are traveling all over doing professional development and working with districts and schools. And so I took a break from being a building principal and I started coaching principals. But then I also started working in higher ed and working with pre-service teachers and teaching in the School of Education. And I fell madly in love with teaching again. It's so fun to kind of come full circle in a way. So I've been doing that now. That is my full-time gig, along with coaching principals and traveling around. But I am having so much fun working with new teachers and pre-service teachers.
I'm not surprised. Erika Bare, what's something that listeners would be surprised to know about you?
Well, surprised. I think the most surprising thing that folks find out about me eventually is that my first real job was actually at Chuck E. Cheese. And I did indeed dress up as the mouse and was pretty exceptional at it. My only challenge was that I'm barely 5 feet. And so oftentimes, the kids and I were at about the same level, but it was a super fun job and I loved it. And one of the first times I really got to hang out with kids on the regular. So I loved it, super fun. And also loving my role now as a superintendent and getting to support students and educators in that way.
I'll never see you the same again, Erika, now that I know you're Chuck E. Cheese. So when I had you guys on the show back at episode 369, you had just written your book, Connecting Through Conversation, a playbook for talking with students. And I remember at the time endorsing your book and reflecting on it with the thought that every educator should own that book. It should be part of their pre-service training. It should be part of their education programs. I just think that if you're listening to this and you're in charge of any kind of educational training with teachers, or you're at the university level and you get to decide curriculum, you need to have a copy of Connecting Through Conversation, a playbook for talking with students, in the hand of every teacher. Because you guys take the practices of some of the most difficult scenarios you can imagine, and you teach people the skills of how to walk kids through really hard situations, de-escalate, scripts for how to do that in ways that kind of lead them to the next thing, behaviors that lower anxiety, all those things that experienced teachers know, but don't necessarily know how to explain. And you guys do that. But now with this new book, and I'm just going to tell you guys, I feel the same way. After I read a school leader's playbook for tough conversations, I was like, okay, now anybody who's getting a degree or a master's or going to step into any kind of educational leadership role, this should be required reading, because it takes all of those most difficult conversations you're going to have, and it gives you really practical ways to think about that across the spectrum of your work, but especially with adults. And so, and I don't even know where to start, but I have questions that I want to ask you guys. But before I even dive into the questions, let me just give you a second to explain your own motivation for what prompted you guys to step from that first book to this one. And Erika, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so we have had the wonderful privilege of being able to go all over and talk to folks about that first book, which has been critically meaningful because it is just summarizing so many of those things that folks kind of know or they have bits of, and just helps refine and make work so much easier. We're finding what's really resonating for folks is, folks are feeling burnt out. They're feeling tired. These jobs are really, really hard. And what's getting in the way isn't necessarily, there is so much work, but there always has been, right? But what's really getting in the folks' way is they're not feeling like they have those skills in their back pocket that they can just pull out to intervene and get things back on the right track. And when we have a whole group of educators moving in that direction, it's so life-changing for a building and for the educators who are there, and that feeling of stress and anxiety can really go to the wayside. So we've had a great time doing this, and inevitably wherever we go, there will be a leader in the room who will come up to us and say, this is incredible. This is so helpful. I'm going to use this. I want everyone in my building to use this. And could you please help me figure out how to translate this into the conversations we have with adults? Because although each one of us got into education because we love kids and we want to serve kids, the conversations that often give school leaders and educational leaders the most anxiety and the most, keeping us up at night, stomach churning, are those conversations that we have to have with the grownups, with the other educators that we serve, with the caregivers of our students. And so navigating those conversations became our next project, and we have had so much fun doing it.
Tiffany, I know you have some added thoughts.
Well, I just think, like Erika said, we all got into this for the kids, and then the parts that are the most challenging are how do we navigate those equally important relationships with the adults. And, I don't think people necessarily learn how to do that other than through trial and error. Like there's so much just getting it wrong or going, that really went sideways and I'm not sure why. Or we're calling, trusted colleagues and folks that we really respect and say, I have to have this very hard conversation. Any pointers or tips on how to do it? And, personally for me, I think one of the most helpful things in reducing some of that anxiety is feeling prepared and having a plan and knowing, okay, this is what I'm going to say. And then here's the order that I'm going to do that. And, Erika and I realized, gosh, we're coaching people through these. Maybe we should write it down. Maybe we should make this more accessible to folks. And ideally, reduce some of that anxiety for our leaders, but also really help cultivate and strengthen those relationships that are so very important between our leaders and staff, our leaders and caregivers, our leaders and folks in the community. Because this strong style of communication and being a strong communicator, that does not happen by accident. That happens through real intentionality, practice, and knowing how something's going to land, or at least having a pretty good idea of how something's going to land.
I love analogies. So, and this may or may not apply completely, but let's imagine, listeners, that you decide you're committed to some really cool fitness plan as you step into this season of your life. And so you hire a coach at a gym, or you download a list of things you should be working on so you can develop the muscles that you need to be developed for whatever outcome that you want. Or maybe you're committed to some running routine, whatever it is. You usually, if we approach those outcomes haphazardly, we're going to have haphazard outcomes. If we approach those outcomes like specifically and targeted like that, then we're going to probably see like measurable growth in those areas that we're actually trying to develop. And the way you guys write this book is, this is it. This is the book that if you want to have an outline for the ways you develop beliefs, relationships, the strategies, the ways you lead conversations, but you don't just explain that through the book. And by the way, a lot of the questions I'm going to ask you next are actually from the end of the book, because at the end of the book, you take every one of those things you've explained throughout, and you give this incredible treasure at the end of the book of just scripts and sentence stems and examples and how to and planning guides for when you want to have hard conversations. Here's where you can script it out. And so I want to begin with the concept of the care out loud routines, because and I'm just going to speak to this because I've read it, and listeners, I'm just going to invite you to pick up a copy of the book. But I just want to hear you guys as the authors. You talk a lot about the routines that make hard conversations better, making rounds, celebrations, intentional greetings, building those relationships. So that's foundational. But we know that even though those are foundational, that doesn't mean it's easy. And so what gets in the way of leaders sustaining the kinds of habits that build the relationships they need to have so that they can have these hard conversations? Let's talk about that for a minute, because you are both practice leaders. Speak to that for leaders for just a second, why that's so essential and why it can also be really hard.
Yeah. So I think there's the most basic thing that gets in the way is time, right? Educators are incredibly busy, all of us, school leaders in particular. And so it's not going to happen because we want it to happen, right? These things have to be calendared. We have to make sure that it becomes a part of our routine, and it has to be systematized, right? We have to really say, okay, I want to make sure I acknowledge everyone's birthday. So that means every Monday I'm writing out birthday cards at this time to this time, and I'm going to make sure that those get in boxes, and I'm working with my office manager on making sure that's set up properly, right? The first half hour of my day is not scheduled, and my job is to not be in my office and be walking around and checking in with folks. And so it is about, and then making sure I'm keeping track. Who have I checked in with this week? Who am I checking in with next week? And making sure that's done. I think another thing that can really get in the way, and it's that moment where we really have to be honest with ourselves, right? If we're struggling with a staff member, if we're having some challenging conversations, if we're running into some personality conflicts, or trying to work through some hard things, it can be really tempting to avoid that classroom when I'm going around doing my rounds. It can be really easy to not try and engage them on some of these care out loud strategies that are so important. And that's when it matters the most. And so, of course, we have to lay that foundation, but we really have to push ourselves to, we like to say, go to the problem. So if we're struggling with a staff member, that means we really need to be showing up as frequently as possible to have those conversations that are more about, like, what are your plans this weekend? How are your kids doing? All of those human elements, because as we're stepping into addressing performance, talking through some of the harder things, if we've laid that foundation, if they know that we care about them as a human, that conversation is going to go so much smoother. So it is about being systematized and also making sure that we're not inadvertently or subtly leaving people off of that list, especially when we have a large staff. We have to be really careful.
Our systems support our habits.
Yep.
Show me your calendar or show me your systems, and I'm going to see the habits you're supporting that create the outcomes that you want. But then at the same time, our attitudes will determine what we're leaning into or what we're avoiding. And so often those hardest conversations become people that we just kind of want to keep on the outskirts. And one of the things I hear you saying, Erika, is if you really want that to change or develop, you're going to lean into it, not move away from it. Tiffany, what are you thinking?
Well, I just think, like Erika said, educators are such busy people, and school leaders in particular. And so much, I think, of a school leader's job, as much as we want it to be proactive, as much as we want it to be systemized, it's really easy for it to be reactive, especially different parts of the year, and we all know what those seasons are. And so it's easy to start just responding to what's this crisis in front of me, followed by the next crisis in front of me, and just kind of doing whatever's right there in front of me. And we all know how important it is to build those relationships and to make that time. We just have to be reminded to do it. And everyone has different I guess that everyone has different strategies that they might use for how they are connecting with folks, or, maybe this book is going to give them some more ideas of how to do that. But I think it's also about, how do you hold yourself accountable to make sure you are doing that? And the part that I love is that when we do intentionally build connection into our schedule, well, gosh, that's a lot more joy. It's just more joyful. It's more, it makes my day better when I know that I'm going to make this phone call to this caregiver to share something good that their child did, or that, I'm outside at pickup or drop off, connecting with folks and seeing folks in the hallway and checking in on them. It reminds me why I do the work and why I'm so connected. And it helps, which I think then helps hold me more accountable when I can think to myself, well, that was rather enjoyable. And I really enjoyed having that connection. I like scheduling things that I find joy in.
You guys are also, thank you for the hard work it's taken you to create, I'm just going to call them sentence stems, coming up with some really practical ways to try to diffuse tension, protect confidentiality, wrap up meetings so people don't continue to go and go and go and go. So I'm just curious, do you have favorite stems? Do either of you have things like that become like, this is something, if I hung out with Tiffany enough, I'm going to hear her say when someone's getting really upset, or Erika say if she's trying to wind someone down. What are some of your favorite stems that other leaders might consider putting in their toolkit?
Well, okay. So as a school leader, people will often say, do you have 5 minutes? Or, do you just have a minute? And in your head, you're like, first of all, you do not want only 5 minutes. I know you want a lot more than 5 minutes. And second, do not have 5 minutes. I have negative minutes. Like, no, I don't have any time right now. And you can't say any of those things, or maybe you do, but that's not ideal, right? Because the message that you're sending is, I'm too busy for you. And that's not what you mean, right? You mean, I've got all these things going on. I don't have time in this moment. But when you say, no, or just, no, I'm not right this minute, that comes across as I'm too busy for you, and that I don't care about your problem. And that's probably the opposite of what you mean. And so one of my absolute favorites is just saying, you know what, this conversation is so important, and I want to make sure that I give it the time it deserves. So let's book some time a little later so we can really sit down and have this conversation that we need to have. And you've said the same thing, right? You basically said, no, I do not have 5 minutes, but you've said it in a way that really honors the person that you're talking with. And I think maybe does a better job of explaining your real intention. And those are just practicable. I know that's not a word, but you can practice that and make it a little more, rote. So it's easier to just say.
Erika, what's one of your favorite stems?
Oh my gosh, I have so many. The piece that I love, and we all have just slightly different versions of these, right? Mm-hmm. So, the way Tiffany says that, I also love that sentence stem. And for me, I'm always like, oh my gosh, you're worth so much more than a minute. Let's schedule a time when we have more than that, where we can really dive in, right? But one that I have been leaning into lately is this: how can I support you? Or what does support look like for you? And in particular, when someone is going through something really hard, because the other piece that school leaders are dealing with is oftentimes we're with people through some of the most challenging parts of their life, right? Mm-hmm. And so being able to say, what does support look like for you right now? Like, what does it look like for you? Because everyone has such a different frame of what support feels like. Some folks need, I need meals, and I need this, and and I want people around me, and other people are like, I just need to be at work and not think about this or talk about this, right? And so being able to have some of those in your back pocket, One of the things that comes up a lot and totally in a different direction is when folks are really pushing us for information that we can't share, right? There's so much information that's confidential. And this happens with both the educators we support and caregivers, where they're really like, I want to know exactly what's happening with that kid or what's going on with this staff member. And so oftentimes with caregivers in particular, I'll say something like, you know what, I can't comment on the specifics of this situation, but I can share with you generally what can happen in situations like this. And then just kind of point to and lean into your handbooks and your policies so that they can, you're not saying, I can't tell you anything, but you're not breaking any confidentiality rules. And with educators, I'm often like, you know, I can't comment on the specifics. Know that, you know, I'm working closely with the folks involved, and, you know, I wouldn't share this if it were about you either. So we need to make sure that we're upholding everyone's dignity in this situation. And so I'm not going to talk about it. And just letting them know that you can't, instead of just kind of shutting it down, and really explaining the reason can go a long way.
Yeah. The last thing you want to do when someone's pressing you for confidential information is switch into attorney mode.
Right.
You know, FERPA does not allow me to say anything that would divulge confidentiality of our personnel or students on campus, but instead of flipping that narrative to, you know, I can't talk to the specifics of this, but let me tell you what we generally would do in a situation like this. Right. Our handbook allows some of the options that are involved, and you can be assured that we're practicing those options in those practices here.
Right.
You guys also address, especially when it comes to caregivers, parents, guardians, anybody that's coming to you in we all know in the context of school that can be lots of different people. Sometimes people share custody. Sometimes people are foster parents. Sometimes people are guardians of their own kids. Sometimes you've got grandparents. And so we all know that a caregiver can be a lot of different people, but you present what you call the caregiver framing model. And I'm just going to say them aloud: of showing care, sharing facts, why you think it happened, naming next steps, and then showing care again to kind of create some clarity every time you're trying to talk to someone. So this might be a hard question to answer in a short setting, but Tiffany, what mistakes do you most often see leaders making in high emotion caregiving conversations? And how does having a structure like that help you prevent missteps?
Yeah, I really appreciate you asking about this, Will, because I think this is such a huge part of our job as administrators. And then also learning the steps well enough to coach educators, you know, teachers and folks to be able to also have these conversations. So we do have that whole framework together where it's follow this template and it'll help. I think the parts that are the trickiest is, and it sounds simple, but it's remembering to start with care. And it's really, you know, hey, you have such an awesome kid. And let me just tell you, I really appreciate this thing that they did, or something that we appreciate about their child. And that automatically helps someone see, oh, you see my kid, you get my kid. And I appreciate that. And, you know, thanks for saying that. And then we're saying what happened, and we're not going to sugarcoat that. We're going to share just those facts. And I think the other really, really tricky part is the part that people skip a lot. And it is saying why you think something happened, right? So it's empathizing with the child, it's guessing at the motivation, and you're sharing that with the caregiver. You're saying, you know, they did this thing, and I honestly think they just acted on impulse. You know, I just really think that she didn't stop and think about what she was doing before she did it. She just really quickly reacted. And I think if she would have stopped and thought, she would have done something differently. That's not quite what happened here. And so let's talk about it. But what that does when you say, here's why I think they behaved in this way, it lets the caregiver know, oh, you really are trying to understand my kid. And that what they're thinking is, oh, you aren't just saying that I have a bad kid. You know, you're saying that maybe, you know, we've already talked to the child. So we're able to say, you know, in talking with them, this is what they shared. And I was able to better understand this. Because I think, you know, I have teenagers. And so it's really important to me, you know, as a mom, that people understand my child and they take the time to get to know them, and that they don't make these rash, you know, quick decisions about them. And so if we share that piece about why we think it happened, it helps them see that we really do care about their child and that we are committed, and you can understand, right, as a caregiver, why that's not going to help them be successful or why we can't do those kinds of things at school. It puts us in a much better place to be able to partner with them. It also helps the caregiver feel, they don't have to feel so defensive, right? Because they're not defending at this point. They're going, oh, okay, well, yeah, what do we do together to make this better? Because my kid cannot keep doing that.
And I'm just going to speak directly to Principal Matters listeners, because anyone who's done this work for a while, all of those dynamics, are present in important conversations. But when I rewind back to my earlier years, I had to learn those practices because I would just jump straight into problem solving, straight into solution. But if you don't take the time to first show care, share those facts, explore why you think this happened, before you step into steps, you're going to have to backtrack because it's going to be messy and often uncomfortable. And sometimes you're going to get a lot of resistance. And just because you learn how to do this doesn't mean it's going to go perfectly either. But it certainly creates the conditions in which you'll probably have more productive conversations moving forward. I'm watching the time because there's so many other things I want to ask you guys, but I want to switch gears because you two don't really pull any punches when it comes to the hard conversations that are going to happen with adults in schools. You have a section specifically on when there's somebody on your team who needs to be coached out. And so let's just assume listeners want to support, they want to develop, they want to build the capacity of the people in their work. But then you recognize there's some people whose behavior is so toxic that they need to be coached out. So Erika, I'm just curious, and I know you can both speak to this, but I'm going to ask you this question. How do leaders hold on to both the dignity of the people that they're working with, but also hold them accountable when they're leading some of these exiting conversations?
Right. I think the first thing that I would say is we have to recognize and acknowledge this is really hard, right? These are some of the hardest conversations we're going to enter into as leaders. And so because it's so hard, it's critical that we prepare ourselves well, because otherwise it's so easy to get sucked into those things that can take away from dignity, right? So if we think about, we've already gotten to know this person. We've already really done every single thing we can to support them in staying because we've exhausted every other possibility. And we need to know that in our heart, and we need to confirm that with others that we trust, that we've done every single thing that's appropriate. And then it's about really remembering that it's critical that we deliver the message succinctly and clearly and in a way that will allow them to walk out of there and recognize at some point, probably not that day, that it was the right thing for everybody. So we really lean into our planning guide on this. And the first step is really about how am I going to communicate this and what needs to be said? Mm-hmm. So really being careful about the purpose, making sure that we're not coming from a place of anger or frustration, any of those things. We want to be really clear. I'm entering into this because this is what's necessary for kids. This is what's necessary for the culture of my building. This is what's necessary for us to move forward. And so I'm getting really clear about that and then being careful about where am I having this meeting? I want to make sure it's not in a place where they're walking out in front of all their colleagues or they're, entering or exiting in a way that is going to be really challenging for them. I want to make sure that there's space after the meeting for them. I also want to make sure that this is going to sound silly, but I've scheduled enough time. This is a life-altering moment for that educator. There needs to be sufficient time for that. And so just like setting that part up is really important. And then it doesn't do anyone any favors to not be clear. We have to say the words, and that's why for me, even still, I've been in this job for a minute. And even still, if I'm entering into a really hard conversation, I'm writing down verbatim what needs to be said. I'm afraid there's no path forward here. your employment with us is going to end on, effective whenever. I need to write that down so that I make sure those words come out of my mouth. It's accountability for me, and also make sure that I'm being really clear. And of course, the coaching part of that, we've been clear throughout. These final conversations are the hardest, but we've had multiple conversations. And in those conversations, we have to make sure, as Brene Brown taught us, clear is kind. So we want to make sure this needs to occur. This behavior needs to change. This situation needs to turn around. Student results need to start looking like this. That's been said. Like exactly what we mean. Not like, I'm wondering if you could think about. We've said this needs to occur by this time, or this is a possible outcome, so that there's no surprises. And that really does allow them to uphold their dignity. And then when we're really parting ways, we need to let them own a part of that story. So engaging them on how is this going to be communicated out? What would you like us to say about this, within reason, but making sure that they have an opportunity to own part of that story. How would you like to get your things? All of those pieces as well.
There is probably nothing more powerful when you're getting ready to have some of the most difficult conversations. And you can't always control all those factors. Sometimes they are on the cuff situations that happen, but a lot of times those most difficult ones, in advance, you're going to need to have this conversation. So there's nothing more powerful than being able to plan in advance. And so I so appreciate you guys putting that tough conversations planning guide at the back of the book as a way for people to just script. And Erika and Tiffany, I know I'm not telling you anything that'll surprise you, but this doesn't just work for school. It works for life. I mean, I've had situations with family members or friendships or whatever, where I've had to sit down and say, what is it that I need to say? Let me just write down that sentence. And where do I want to communicate it, and when, and how do I want to communicate it? And if we need get nothing else out of this conversation, what's the one thing that needs to be said here? And then what commitment do I want to invite someone to in the situation? If I'm coaching someone towards improvement, then how do we resolve this and move forward and grow? If I'm coaching someone out in a context of work setting, for instance, then making sure we're really clear on what the next steps are going to be too. Tiffany, do you want to add anything to that conversation as you think about those hardest coaching conversations?
They just are the hardest. They just are. And I think it's so normal that they are the ones that keep us up at night and that cause us that much stress. And, having the really clear script just helps. It just helps me know, okay, for me personally, knowing I have a plan, I think is really helpful. But I think, what we go into in real detail in the book, and we skip over a little bit here, is just how much leads up to that. The coaching to really lead up to that is so important. And one of the things that Erika and I coach folks on, and we've included in the book, is that often educators are such empathetic humans, and we're so kind and we're so thoughtful and we're really compassionate. So when we're giving feedback, sometimes it's easy to fall into softening the message, and saying it in a way that's maybe easier for the person to hear. And sometimes we run the risk of softening the message so much that we lose the message entirely. And so that doesn't do anyone, I think Erika said that, it isn't doing any favors for anyone. So really making sure that we say the thing that needs saying. We can still, like we talked about with caregivers, we can say why we think it happened. We can share why we think that motivation is there. But it's really important that if we want people to make improvements, that we tell them exactly what needs improving. And also, as we're coaching through, believing that they will do it. Like having that belief, like setting out, going, okay, I am coaching you up and coach up and coach up and coach up. And then ideally all of that works, and there are times when we realize, no, we're going to have to move into coaching out, and still maintaining their dignity, still maintaining, being true to ourselves and holding true to our values while we go through that process. I'm not going to say it makes it easy, because it does not, but I do think it makes it easier.
I'm going to tell a funny story as we wrap up. because I'm trying to think of a way to describe the strengths that I admire in the both of you. But I remember after several years of teaching, stepping into the hallway. This was when I was still in the classroom, but passing period, you're doing your thing. You're just standing out there observing kids, welcoming kids to class. And I just remember, like, I'm going to use some Star Wars analogies. I felt a change in the force. Like I was like, there's something's not right here. I can feel there's something not right going on here. And I just started walking into the hallway and then toward the classroom where I felt something wasn't right. And when I stepped in, there was a huge student fight that was breaking out. And there was a young teacher in there who first year did not know what to do. And so I jumped in, and so did two other veteran teachers right behind me. I had no idea how they knew either. And after that whole situation was resolved, and you guys know, you've been there. I just remember thinking, how did I know that was going to happen? And I still don't know how to explain the, whatever you want to call it, the Jedi skills, the ninja skills that teachers develop over time. When I think about my friends Erika Bare and Tiffany Burns, I think of you guys as you're just Jedi communicators. And I mean, you guys are so good at knowing, not just doing the work, because I've read your books and I've known you guys personally. We've known each other outside of this context too. So first of all, I just want to say that out loud, but then I also just want to say to any listeners that these are skills we continue to develop over time, and we never mastered them. And so if you want a resource that's going to help you listeners to continue to develop those skills and add some new tools that maybe you've never used before, you need to get a hold of a School Leader's Playbook for Tough Conversations. So as we wrap up, how can listeners find your book? How can they stay connected with you? And what are some parting words of advice that you would either want to share before we say goodbye? Erika, you go first.
Thank you, Will. Those are super kind words. I've never been called a Jedi before. I love that. The best way to get in touch with us is definitely through our website, connectingthroughconversation.com. And you can find all of our socials on there. You can email us. We would absolutely love to connect with folks. And then our book is available on Amazon, super easy. And we would be thrilled if folks decide to pick up a copy. And we do really love supporting teams and districts with this work as well.
And Tiffany?
Well, I think people can now find me on LinkedIn. I'm going to go ahead and change my title today to say Jedi Communicator. I'm such a huge Star Wars fan, Will. That's maybe the best compliment I've ever received. And I will be telling my deeply in love with Star Wars family. Yeah, we would love to connect with folks on socials. And Eric and I, we always just like to share, information and things. So we're doing, we've got our blog. We'll be starting our own podcast soon. So we would love to be able, just connectingthroughconversation.com, buy the book, find all the things. We're always doing something to help educators.
Well, Tiffany and Erika, thank you guys for your leadership. I'm still picturing that scene in Star Wars where Luke walks in and he just waves his hand and they do whatever. It's not magic, but these are skills we can learn. So thank you both for the hard work of taking those skills and translating them into a new resource. Thank you for the way that you coach and lead teams in your own places, but also across the U.S. And Principal Matters listeners, thank you for your listening and learning together. We'll put all these resources in our show notes. You can check them all out at the website at williamdparker.com. But until next time, thanks for doing what matters. We'll talk to you again soon. You'll find free resources like this one at williamdparker.com. Subscribe for our free weekly newsletter, which contains bonus material, and also check out the links for Grow Academies, Masterminds, Executive Coaching, and Keynote presentations for my books, as well as for Principal Matters Associates. You can find out more under our speakers tab at williamdparker.com. Thank you for learning together, and thank you for doing what matters.
Principal Matters.